Hey everyone, Griffin Schiller here with the playlist, back with another interview, and this time I had the opportunity to speak with the composer of Mortal Engines, Mr. Tom Holkenborg, aka Junkie XL, as many of you know him by. Tom is a Grammy-nominated multi-platinum producer who also just happens to be one of the hottest names in film composing, scoring such projects as Mad Max Fury Road, 300 Rise of an Empire, Batman vs. Superman, and most recently, Tomb Raider. During our conversation, we not only discussed his work on Mortal Engines, but how he developed his iconic drum sound, a brief mention of his original plans for Justice League, and his Studio Time YouTube series in which he's giving invaluable in-depth tutorials on film scoring. It was an absolute pleasure talking with Tom. He's a great guy, and I hope you all enjoy the interview. You know, I saw the film last night, and so, you know, Christian Rivers, he asked you to score Mortal Engines. How familiar are you with the property? What's your creative approach like to discovering what the sound of that universe is like?
Well, the thing is, I was not familiar with the books. I've heard about it, but I wasn't familiar with the books. And so when you get asked to work on a film, I usually not go back and then read the books. You know, I usually try to stay away from it because I have to make music for what's in front of me. And what's in front of me is the film. So if you know the complete history and if you know what's going to happen in the future, you might potentially miss a few very important beats in the film because you know what's going to happen, but it might not be there in the picture. So that's why I usually tend to stay away from it. For inspiration and how I start is like, you know, first you read the script and then you watch the film and then you sit down with the creative team. So it's Christian Rivers, the director, and then it's Peter Jackson, the producer, and Fran Walsh Jackson, also producer, but also co-scriptwriter. So it's really the three of them that I really dealt with when it came to ideas and inspiration. So we did talk a lot about the film and what the score needed to be. They were very specific about certain things. They were saying, we like the score to be very thematic in nature. So we want to hear a lot of melodies. We want to hear a lot of harmonies. And that was a clear instruction. And then we talked about what the main themes potentially needed to be for the film. So there's London, there's Hester, obviously, there's Tom, there's Valentine, Medusa, and then there's Shrike. So those were and the anti-traction people. Mm-hmm. So it's like 5, 6, 7 major themes in the film. And I started with London, and the inspiration for that really came by looking into the history of England and the history of music in England combined with military. You know, almost every military aspect in England has their own theme song. You know, it's insane.
No, I definitely noticed that, and that was something I really appreciated, was how you gave each like city or region really their own individual sound. And you're talking about balancing all of those melodies. I think they all managed to come through doing that. Yeah.
I haven't seen the final product yet. I will tonight. So tonight there's a premiere in Los Angeles, and then that's when I will see the finished product also for the first time. So you know more than I do.
Gotcha. Yeah. So going back to something you mentioned you obviously working with Christian Rivers and Peter Jackson as well. So I'm curious because he was only not only a producer, he was a producer and he helped write the script. How, I guess, involved was he in the entire process?
Very much. I mean, and usually producers are, you know, making a movie is a team effort. It's the director. The opinion of the director is very important. Then the producers are very important. Obviously, the studio is important, and then you know the various people that work on it. So it's always like a team effort that is spearheaded by the director. But with this movie, I would say it's like from a music standpoint, I really dealt with the three of them. All three of them. So that's how they work together.
Gotcha. Okay, that's interesting. So anytime you're creating a new world like this, the sound of that world is equally as important as the visual aspect, at least for me. So whether it be like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Mad Max, the music plays such an important role in the identity of it. So I'm curious as to you mentioned a little bit about going back and looking at like the history of London to develop that sound, but in just in general terms, just kind of creating the sound of the world. How did you go about that?
I would say, if many people compare this movie with Mad Max, and there's definitely similarities. It's at some point in time in the future after an apocalyptic event, like what the world would look like and what is important and what's not important. Now, with Mad Max, for instance, I had very strict instructions from George Miller to really put the emphasis on scoring the world. The craziness of the world.
Yeah.
Whereas with Peter Jackson and Christian Rivers and Fran with Mortal Engines, I got the very clear instruction that we need to feel the emotional journey of Hester throughout the film. And yes, focus on the outside world, score the unique world that is there. But what is more important is the story of Hester. So that means that automatically the music shifts sometimes to different aspects where, yes, you see action on screen, but the music is not necessarily action. The music is following what Hester is feeling and what she's thinking. And it's a different approach, and it usually leads to a more melodic or emotional approach to the film. That's why overall, when the music is there in Mortal Engines, it's primarily there for underscoring scenes and for emotional scenes. And in action scenes, it has a slightly different role than as it had with Mad Max, for instance.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I mean, something that's kind of like a staple for you, I guess, is that percussion. And I definitely noticed that in this film as well, especially the opening chase scene where everything's very driving. So I'm curious, this is just something I've always been curious about. With percussion being a hallmark of yours, and it especially being part of the identity of, say, 300 Rise of an Empire or Mad Max Fury Road, how do you come up with like the perfect drum sounds? They just sound like the perfect war drums, and it's so distinct to your sound.
Well, I play most of the percussion always myself, and I have a certain approach to playing. I love the rock and roll aspect of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I really like to say it frankly, beat the shit out of a drum. There's nothing like it. But it's also what I really like. Like I always call myself a full contact composer. And I just like to have things in my hand. I like to beat on drums. I like to play guitar and play bass and turn knobs and synthesizers. And I'm not the type of guy that sits with a notebook and a pen behind the piano all day. It's right, like the score. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, for sure.
It's a physical experience for me. What I really like, and percussion is part of it. And I always felt when the first drum track like that I did many years ago when I did all the trailers for the movie Hero with I forgot the actor.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank as well, but I know the movie you're talking about. Yeah.
Jet Li.
Yeah. Oh yes, Jet Li. Yes. Yeah.
So that was the first time I did like that drum kit, really massive rhythms, and it was great. And I always felt that because I'm a drummer myself, that drum kits have never really been used in action scores. It's always taikos and timpanis, and so that was the first time I started experimenting with it, and then. I did it more and more. Eventually, I started working with Hans, and we did it then on Man of Steel, like extensively, and Batman vs Superman. And then I took it even further on 300, and then Mad Max was a whole different deal. But yeah, percussion is always it's very important for me, and the rhythms that you play. But sometimes the percussion has a really overwhelming effect on the music, like Mad Max, and I wouldn't say that's the case with Mortal Engines. It's there when it needs to be, but it has a more functioning role. It's more about the the themes and the orchestra actually.
Yeah, and I definitely noticed that listening through the score, you definitely put more of an emphasis on like the sweeping emotional aspects, but the drums were definitely there when they needed
They're
to
always
be.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now I do want to ask you, because you have collaborated with Hans Zimmer multiple times. I guess, how did that relationship kind of begin? Because I watched a video or I read something where it said that you first got really into wanting to be a composer when you saw the original Blade, and they used like a track, I believe, they used one of your tracks in it, and that really like sparked your interest. But how do you go from there to working with one of the greatest names in film composing history?
Well, it's a long road, and little did I know that when I ended up here in LA in 2002, that I would, in 2018, then have collaborated with Hans and collaborated with George Miller and with Peter Jackson and Christian Rivers and all these really great directors.
Yeah.
So I feel like a very blessed guy, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I came here in town and I started meeting people, and it was very clear to me very early on that this would take a lot of time. This would not happen. It's not like you go to LA and it's like, I'm here. Movie.
Yeah.
It's not going to work like that. So I assisted a lot of different composers in town with like little things and sometimes a little more. And then eventually I met Hans like a couple of times, and we started to become acquainted and friends. And at a certain point he said, why don't we just work on this together? It would really be fun. And so we started, first it was like some smaller stuff, and then a little more and a little more. And then eventually he wanted me to work on a project like a lot. And then, and that's when we decided, maybe it makes sense that I have my studio right next to yours. So then I moved my studio over to remote control in 2010. And then for 2 years, we worked really closely together on lots of different movies. And then in 2013, I started on Mad Max, and that's when I left remote control. And then I went back to my own studio.
Well, speaking of Mad Max, though, I do have to ask. Now, obviously, your score for Mad Max is exceptional. I think it's probably one of my favorite pieces you've ever done. Really just blew me away. Now, I know George Miller is supposedly working on a sequel or like a Furiosa spinoff or something. Has there been any early conversations regarding that? Has he approached you at all?
I know nothing.
Of course.
I know. I'm Tom from Barcelona, and I know nothing.
No worries. Totally understand. But kind of going off of the collaborations with Hans Zimmer, I do want to dive into some of like your work on the DC cinematic universe, because I think it's exceptional. It's, in my mind, some of the best comic book scores who have come out in like the past decade or so. It's really, really incredible as to what you guys did there. And I'm really curious, like I know you probably can't talk a whole lot about it, but in terms of working on Justice League, when you were part of it, was there any thought in incorporating some of the thematic elements of like the previous films into that score, considering like how ingrained in the universe they were?
Let me just give you a simple answer. Of course, I can't dive too deep into it because at a certain point, Josh took over from Zach, and he wanted a slightly different approach. So obviously, he went like in a different direction.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and there were, I mean, obviously those are unreleased tracks, but kind of speaking to unreleased tracks are, a lot of composers, they come up with stuff, and it never necessarily makes the screen or makes the cut. Are there any like particular unreleased tracks that you have done for any film, not just Justice League, but for any film that you really wish would have made the cut?
Well, the thing is this, that for me, music is a personal thing. It's something that I like to do. I also still make a lot of music that is not even meant to go into a film or meant to go into a video game or whatever. It's just music because I like making music. And, when I worked, for instance, on Brimstone, which was a very serious drama with just strings, then after 14 days of string writing, you're just like,
Yeah.
bang on some drums or just play some loud guitars, and so you then start making music just for fun, but the thing is, like, music is for me a very personal thing, and it's a creative energy that needs to come out. But I don't feel the necessity that everything I make is supposed to come out. You know, it's also fine that a lot of music is just like sits on my computer and I can play it every now and then and just like learn from it. It's like, oh, I did that then, and oh yeah, and I learned from that. And so at this point in time, when I look back on music that I've made for movies that didn't make the cut, now, like, looking back, I'm just like, well, you know, that's totally fine, because now it's like 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years later, and I've learned so much. I can do a way better job writing something like that. And for me, it's always like, you know, it's like a learning curve, and it's like, oh, now I'm going to do it like this, and now I'm going to do it like that. So I think it's different when you talk to a composer or an artist that needs a lot of time to finally finish a piece of music. Then potentially you might be more careful with that piece of music that you've made, because you spent so much time on it. But I work really fast. I think really fast, and by the time a piece of music is done, my head is already into the next piece, and I'm not emotionally attached to stuff that I've done before.
Yeah, no, for sure. And if you may, I just got one final question for you, and it's regarding like the studio time stuff you do on your YouTube channel, because I'm a big fan of that. I think it's incredible what you're doing, really introducing people to.
Thank you. Are you a musician yourself?
Well, I watch, stuff, and I have friends who are really into film scoring, and I always say, like, hey, if you want to learn stuff, go watch these like in-depth breakdowns, because it's invaluable information that you're not getting anywhere else, well, at least for free, you know. So I mean, my big thing is, what prompted you to really want to do that? Do you have future plans for that, to expand upon it? I know you're working on like a brass library. If you could just maybe talk about that a little bit. The
brass library, I can't talk about it right now. We're basically, I said I was going to do this brass library. We're pretty good when it comes to development, and at this point, it's gathering thoughts from people online, that have been leaving a lot of comments on the fact that I was going to do brass library, like what people are looking for and what is important for them or what's important for me. So right. I have a list of stuff that's very important for me to record, but then other people have really good ideas too. So the list has been expanded with great ideas that we got from people online. So that's the brass library. I can talk about it more like in half a year or so from now.
Gotcha.
But the education thing is it's technically how I grew up. My mom was a teacher, and she would teach throughout the day for different schools, and then at night she would teach kids that came from a less fortunate background, so they didn't have a lot of money, so she would do that for free. So that's how I grew up. And then in my teen and 20s and 30s, I had a lot of help from people that would give me advice, and showed me how to do like certain things. And then when I was 35, 36, I got asked by a really big music university in Holland to help them set up a 4-year music course. So I was connected with that university for 10 years to help build that study. And now it's done, and it's really successful, and it's going really well. And then after that, I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? And then that's when the idea for Studio Time was born. It's like, okay, let's do these really cool, in-depth tutorials to show people how I work. Not that I consider myself the master of film scoring, because I'm not. But I like to show people what I do, and it could lead to two things. One, people really want to work a similar way, or it's clear to you you don't want to work like that, and it becomes a process of elimination. So either or, the result is fine, and it's been really a labor of love. The Studio Time series. It's expensive to do it. We do it, we make it available for free. We do it without advertising and stuff like that. And it should really be like that. It should be giving back to the community that has been such a great support to me, over the last 25 years, buying my records or buying my soundtrack albums or whatnot. And it's something to give back to young, aspiring, young composers. And you know how the internet is.
Yeah.
It can be brutal and it can be aggressive, but I have to say, that YouTube channel is really like a positive channel, and a lot of people discuss among each other the things that I do, but also what they do or what they would like to do. So I think it's really great to have channels like that, and I see also more people doing something similar from different areas, creating these really great YouTube channels with like free content for people who want to study and learn.
Yeah, no, I think it's just incredible the amount of things that you can do now and what you can learn just off of YouTube alone. And I think you're definitely inspiring a whole generation of composers. You're definitely helping them. So it's awesome, and I agree. The positivity that I've seen, not only like in the YouTube comment section, but on your your Twitter feed and whatnot, it's really, really awesome stuff.
We're just finished with shooting season 3.
Oh, really? Oh, awesome.
So we did like another, I think 20 or 30 episodes. And
nice.
we're gonna start like next week, I think, when the premiere of Mortal Engines is happening, and then we're gonna start with the new Studio Time series.
Gotcha. So are you kind of gonna do like a breakdown of what you did with Tomb Raider and the Dark Tower with Mortal Engines?
It's part of it, yeah. So
okay.
we're gonna cover a lot of different subjects, but also breakdown of themes for Mortal Engines and for Alida, but also general videos about how, mixing. I built a whole new template, so we did like 4 or 5 episodes on the new template, what's in there and how it's working. So there's a lot of really cool stuff. I hope that people will enjoy, all those new episodes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I know I certainly will, and I'm sure many others will as well. There you have it. That was the interview with Tom Holkenborg, aka Junkie XL. As you can see, Tom is a great guy, and I can't wait to talk to him again sometime. Mortal Engines comes out December 14th, and Tom's score for the film also releases on December 14th, if you are interested in checking that out. Thanks for checking out this interview, and until next time, take care.